The Taliban commander was laughing. Standing on a ridge overlooking the valley, watching an American sniper bleed into the Afghan dirt, he laughed the way men laugh when they believe they've already won. He had 40 fighters. He had the high ground. He had an ambush so perfectly set that the Americans never saw it coming. What he didn't have, what none of them had any idea about, was the 24-year-old woman crouched 50 yards away in the darkness. The one nobody in the US Army had ever looked at twice. The one whose entire job was counting ammunition. She was about to end his war. If this story grabs you from the very first second, hit follow, drop a like, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's go. Fort Raven Ridge, Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, 0347 hours. The supply depot smelled like rust, diesel exhaust, and the particular kind of loneliness that settles into concrete walls when a building has been lived in too long by people who don't want to be there. Maya Hart was on her knees between two floor-to-ceiling shelving units, a clipboard wedged under her left arm and a pen light clenched between her teeth, counting .308 cartridges by hand for the third time in 2 days. Not because she'd lost count, she never lost count. Because someone in 2nd Platoon had submitted a requisition form for 200 rounds of 7.62 by 51mm NATO and written the wrong lot number. And now the entire chain of custody was a bureaucratic disaster that her sergeant was going to blame on her regardless of who actually screwed it up. She moved her lips slightly as she counted, a habit she'd had since she was 7 years old, sitting at her mother's kitchen table in Bakersfield, California, counting the dollar bills her mother set aside for rent every month. Small stacks, never enough, always needing to be exact. 196, 197, 198. Hart? She didn't look up. Hart, I know you can hear me. 199, 200. She pulled the pen light from between her teeth and straightened up. Specialist Danny Ruiz was leaning against the doorframe with a cup of coffee in each hand. His rifle slung loose on his back, his expression carrying that particular mix of amusement and mild irritation that seemed to be his permanent factory setting. 200, she said. Tell Sergeant Briggs the lot number discrepancy is on whoever filled out the DA Form 2062, not on my end. Ruiz extended one of the cups toward her. Nobody cares about the form, Maya. I care about the form. Yeah. He set the cup on the nearest shelf. That's kind of the problem. She looked at him. I'm not saying it like it's a bad thing, he said quickly. I'm saying it like, look, there's a briefing at 0430. Walker wants everyone, even logistics. Why would Walker want logistics at an ops briefing? Ruiz shrugged, but there was something in the shrug that wasn't quite casual. Beats me. But he asked specifically. He paused. He said your name. Maya set down the clipboard. Commander Reed Walker ran the kind of meeting that made other officers nervous. Not because he was loud, he wasn't, but because he looked at people like he was calculating something behind his eyes and hadn't told anyone what the formula was yet. He was 41 years old, former SEAL, currently running Special Operations Coordination for this sector of Kandahar Province, and he had the face of a man who had been disappointed by the world so many times that disappointment had simply become his baseline. Not bitter, just realistic. Maya stood in the back of the briefing room with Ruiz and 4 other support staff, all of them standing slightly apart from the 12 operators seated in front. The room was lit with a single overhead fluorescent that flickered every 40 seconds. Someone had taped a topographic map to the wall with what looked like actual duct tape. Walker stood beside the map and didn't bother with preamble. Blackstone Valley. He tapped the map with 2 fingers. Intelligence has confirmed an active weapons cache, RPGs, Manpads components, IED precursor materials, possibly HVT adjacent. We go in at 2200 tomorrow, fast rope insertion from 2 birds, depot demolition, extract before first light. One of the operators, Staff Sergeant Kerrigan, a man built like a brick wall wearing a beard, raised his hand halfway. ROE. Standard. Positive ID before engagement, but I'll tell you right now, anything that moves in that valley after we insert is not a shepherd. A quiet acknowledgement moved through the room. Walker's eyes drifted to the back wall, to the logistics cluster. I need a specialist on this one. Someone who can account for sensitive equipment, maintain manifests on the explosives package, and keep a running count on what we're carrying in versus what we're bringing out. A pause. heart. Every head in the room turned. Maya kept her face neutral, which took more effort than she expected. "I'm logistics," she said. "I don't go on raids." "You do now," Walker said. "Voluntary, but I'd like a yes in the next 30 seconds. She should have said no. That was the rational answer. She knew it the moment she opened her mouth. "Yes," she said. She had no good explanation for it. Later, lying on her bunk staring at the ceiling, she turned the moment over in her head and couldn't find the bottom of it. It wasn't bravery. She didn't think she was brave. She'd spent 24 years being carefully, deliberately unremarkable. The kid at school who sat in the middle row, the enlisted soldier who filed paperwork with frightening precision and never once asked to carry a rifle into anything. She was good at being invisible, which was maybe the problem. She was too good at it. The thing about being invisible is that after a while, you start to wonder if you actually exist. She was still staring at the ceiling when her phone buzzed with a notification from the base training calendar. A name she recognized, Kane E. Marksmanship Fundamentals, Advanced Module, Day 4. She'd been ignoring it for 3 days. Elias Kane was not supposed to be at Fort Raven Ridge. He'd shown up 2 weeks ago as part of some Joint Special Operations Command skills exchange program that half the base thought was unnecessary and the other half hadn't heard of. Retired Master Sergeant, 19 years as a sniper instructor at Fort Bragg, before a shoulder injury ended his operational career. He ran his sessions in the early morning before the heat became hostile, out on Range 7, which everyone else considered too exposed and uncomfortable. Maya had been assigned to his course the same way she'd been assigned to most things in her life. Somebody needed a body to fill a slot, and she was available. She'd attended the first session expecting to be bored. She hadn't been bored. Range 7, 6 days earlier, 0530 hours. There were 11 of them in the course, 9 infantry guys who treated it like an inconvenience, 1 combat medic named Torres, who kept making notes in a small green notebook, and Maya. Kane was shorter than she expected, late 50s maybe, with close-cropped grey hair and hands that looked like they'd been carved out of something denser than regular human material. He wore no rank, no decorations, no tactical gear, just a faded brown t-shirt and BDU trousers. He didn't introduce himself. He just picked up a rifle from the bench, walked to the firing line, and put 5 rounds through a target at 500 meters so fast that 3 people didn't realize he'd fired until they heard the distant impacts. Then he set the rifle down and turned around. "Everything you think you know about shooting," he said, "is probably wrong. I'm not here to teach you how to pull a trigger. You already know how to do that. I'm here to teach you how to not pull it, and why that's the harder skill." One of the infantry guys, Kowalski, a big kid from Wisconsin with forearms like fence posts, muttered something to the person next to him. Kane didn't look at Kowalski. He just said, "Something funny, son?" "No, Sergeant." "Good, because in about 40 minutes you're going to be struggling to hit a man-sized target at 300 meters, and I'd rather you spend that time focusing than laughing." He was right. Kowalski put his first 3 rounds a foot and a half wide. Maya put her first 3 rounds inside a 6-inch group. Kane didn't say anything about it. He moved down the line. He corrected grips, adjusted breathing, talked about natural point of aim and how the body fights itself when the mind is too loud. He spoke in short sentences. He never raised his voice. When the session ended, everyone else grabbed their gear and left. Maya stayed to help police the brass. It was a logistics reflex. Leave a space cleaner than you found it. Kane crouched beside her, picking up casings. "Where'd you learn to shoot?" he asked. "I didn't," she said. "I mean, I qualified twice, but nothing like this." He looked at her for a moment, not the way men usually looked at her, which was either through her or past her, or with the faint, patronizing interest of someone who's already categorized you as irrelevant. He looked at her the way someone looks at a door they weren't expecting to find. "Come back tomorrow," he said, "early, before the group." "Why?" "Because you're wasting time counting ammunition that anyone with a calculator could count." He stood up, dusted off his knees. "And because what I saw on that line today doesn't happen by accident." She wanted to say something dismissive, something that would put her back in the comfortable box of being ordinary. Instead, she said, "What time?" 5 mornings in a row, before sunrise, before the rest of the base was fully awake. Just Kane, Maya, a rifle, and silence. He didn't treat her like a student, he treated her like a problem he was working through out loud. "Most people tense up," he said on the second morning, watching her settle into position. They're so focused on the target that everything else goes rigid. Their breathing stops, their muscles lock, and then they're fighting the gun instead of being the gun. How do you stop that? You don't stop it, you accept it. He crouched behind her, watching her eye alignment through the scope. Fear is data. It's your body telling you information. The mistake people make is trying to turn the volume down. The right move is to learn the language. That sounds like a fortune cookie. All the best tactical advice sounds like a fortune cookie until the moment it saves your life. He wasn't wrong about any of it. That was the infuriating thing. Every session, she walked away feeling like something had shifted slightly inside her, like furniture being moved in a room she hadn't known existed. By the fifth morning, she was hitting man-sized targets at 600 meters with consistency that made Kane go very quiet for a while before saying, "Hart, what's your current MOS?" 92A, Automated Logistical Specialist. A silence. "Of course it is," he said. She didn't tell anyone about the early sessions. It felt too private, like admitting to something she didn't fully understand herself. But the night before the Blackstone Valley mission, lying on her bunk with the gear she'd been issued, sitting at the foot of her rack, M4 carbine, plate carrier, nods, the whole unfamiliar ensemble, she thought about what Kane had said on the last morning they'd trained together. The thing about talent is it doesn't ask permission. It just waits until the circumstances are right, and then it shows up whether you're ready or not. She'd laughed at that. She wasn't laughing now. She stared at the ceiling for another hour. Then she got up, checked her magazine, chambered around, put on the safety, and went to find Ruiz. He was in the motor pool doing absolutely nothing productive. "Hey," she said. He looked up. "Hey yourself. If something goes sideways tomorrow..." "It won't." "I know, but if it does..." She paused. "The lot number discrepancy on the 7.62. It's in a folder on my desk. Top drawer, left side. Tell Briggs it's his problem now." Ruiz stared at her. "That's what you're worried about?" he said. "Paperwork?" "I'm worried about leaving things unfinished." He didn't say anything for a moment, then, "Maya, you're going to be fine. You don't know that." "No," he admitted. "I don't." He looked at her with something that wasn't quite pity and wasn't quite respect, but was somewhere between them. "But for what it's worth, I think Walker picked you for a reason." "He picked me because he needed a body." "Maybe." A shrug. "Or maybe because some people look like the most obvious choice, even when nobody can explain why." She didn't know what to do with that, so she said goodnight and walked back to her bunk. She didn't sleep. Mission brief, 2100 hours, the following evening. The helicopters were already warm. 2 MH-60 Blackhawks, blades turning, rotor wash flattening the grass at the edge of the airfield. The ground smelled like aviation fuel and dry earth. Maya stood with the chalk in full kit, her plate carrier heavier than anything she'd worn before, the unfamiliar weight of combat gear distributed in ways that felt wrong and would probably keep feeling wrong. Around her, the operators moved with the unhurried efficiency of people who have done this so many times that preparation has become identical to routine. She was the only one whose hands were shaking. She put them in her pockets. Sniper Derek Shaw appeared beside her, checking his rifle one more time with the automatic, unconscious competence of a man who has done it 10,000 times. He was 32, sharp-faced, quiet. He'd barely looked at her during the briefing. "First time on a bird?" he asked, not looking up from his rifle. "First time on anything," she said. He glanced at her then, quick, assessing. "Keep your head down on insertion. Watch your footing when you exit. Stay tight to whoever's in front of you." He paused. "And if things go loud, I stay back, maintain accountability of the equipment package, and don't get in anyone's way. I know." Shaw looked at her for another moment. "Yeah," he said. "Don't get in anyone's way." It wasn't unkind, it was just honest. And honest, Maya had always found, was easier to hold on to than kind. Walker appeared at the front of the chalk, not shouting, just loud enough to carry over the rotor noise. 2 minutes, load up." Maya pulled her hands out of her pockets. They weren't shaking anymore. She didn't know why. She climbed aboard. The flight into Blackstone Valley took 47 minutes. Maya sat in the jump seat with her legs against the firewall, watching the night vision green world scroll past through the open door. Mountains like broken teeth, wadis cutting through the landscape like old scars. Occasional lights in the distance, compounds, villages, Or something else, moving past and disappearing into the dark. Nobody talked. The operators sat with the loose posture of controlled exhaustion, some with their eyes closed, some staring at nothing. Shaw had his rifle across his thighs and was rotating the magnification ring on his scope almost imperceptibly, a gesture so automatic he probably didn't know he was doing it. Maya took inventory. It was what she did when she was scared. It was what she'd always done. Count the things you can count, name the things you can name. If you know what's around you, the world is smaller and the fear is proportional. 240 rounds distributed across the chalk. 4 explosive charges, detonation equipment in waterproof case, secured by Sergeant Okafor. Medical kit at position 4, secondary radio at position 7. She knew exactly what was on this aircraft. She knew exactly what the mission required. For a moment, just a moment, that knowledge felt like armor. Then the pilot's voice crackled through the headset. 2 minutes out. LZ looks. The world turned white. Not light, not an explosion, both. A sound like the sky tearing apart. The helicopter lurched so violently that Maya's head cracked against the firewall, and for a half second she was nowhere, just darkness and ringing and the sensation of falling at an angle that felt wrong in every possible way. Then the ground came up. She didn't lose consciousness. That was the thing that surprised her most. Everything was moving. No, rolling. No, sliding. And there was a sound of metal she never wanted to hear again. And someone was shouting something she couldn't pass, and then the world stopped moving, and there was just dust. Dust everywhere, in her mouth, her eyes, packed into the collar of her plate carrier. She coughed, spat, tried to find the ground with her hands, found it, pushed up. Around her, the Black Hawk was a ruin. Not burning yet. The fuel cells had held, or they'd all be dead already, but the fuselage was cracked open like an egg. The tail section twisted 30 degrees off true. The rotors gone somewhere into the darkness. Operators were moving. Already moving. Walker was up, bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow that he hadn't acknowledged, already pulling people toward cover, his voice low and controlled. Perimeter. Southeast ridgeline. 30 meters. Move. Maya got to her feet. Her left knee had connected with something hard during the crash, and it screamed at her, but it held weight. She grabbed the equipment case with the demolitions package still intact, handle still attached, and moved. Shaw was already running for high ground with his rifle. The first shots came from the north ridge, then the south, then everywhere at once. The Americans were good. She could see it even through the chaos and the fear and the dust still in her eyes. The way they moved together, the way positions were established in the time it took her heart to beat 4 times, the way Walker and Shaw communicated in clipped radio traffic that was almost a different language. North element, 2 movers, 270, over. Copy, engaging. South, hold, now. She stayed behind a boulder that had no business being as useful as it was. The equipment case between her knees, watching the gun flashes light up the ridgelines in patterns that started to make a horrible kind of sense if she watched long enough. They'd known. The enemy had known the Americans were coming. The ambush was too clean, too positioned. Someone had given up the timing. That thought lasted about 3 seconds before the more immediate problem reasserted itself. Shaw's rifle went quiet. Not the quiet of discipline, the wrong kind of quiet. She looked toward his position on the elevated rock 20 meters away and saw him sliding down the back face of it with one arm not working right, clutching his shoulder with his opposite hand, his rifle left up top. Dark stains spreading fast through the sleeve of his uniform. Walker's voice on the radio. Shaw's down. I need eyes on North Ridge line. Someone get to that. He didn't finish the sentence. Because the fighters on the North Ridge had shifted. They were coming down, moving in groups of 3 through the scrub and rock, using the darkness, using the terrain, and the one rifle that had been keeping them honest was suddenly sitting 20 meters away on top of a rock with nobody behind it. Maya looked at the rifle. She looked at the advancing fighters. She looked at the rifle. Fear is data, Kane's voice said in her head. Learn the language. Her knee was screaming. Her hands were covered in somebody else's blood from helping move Shaw to cover. She had approximately 40 rounds in the magazine on her M4 and zero confidence that it would do what this situation required. The fighters were less than 200 meters away and closing. She moved. Not a decision. Not a brave moment with swelling orchestral music behind it. Just her body moving before her brain caught up, crawling on her elbows through the dirt toward the base of Shaw's rock, her knee protesting every foot of progress, bullets cracking overhead so close she could feel the displaced air. She reached the rock, Looked up. The rifle was up there. She started climbing. And that's when Walker's voice came through the radio on her chest. Not to her, to the whole net. But she heard it clearly enough. "This is Raven 6. We're in a bad spot. I need that ridgeline suppressed or we're going to start losing people in the next 4 minutes." 4 minutes. She reached the top of the rock, grabbed the rifle, settled in behind it, pressed her eye to the scope. And the entire battlefield, all of the chaos and the noise and the blood and the fear, collapsed down into something small and precise and suddenly terrifyingly familiar. Breath, distance, wind. The first fighter stepped into her crosshairs without knowing it. She thought about the lot numbers on the ammunition requisition form. She thought about counting. 1. Her finger found the trigger. She squeezed. And everything changed. The first shot was loud in a way she hadn't prepared for. Not the report. She'd heard rifles fire plenty of times on ranges, had catalogued the acoustic signature of every weapon system in Fort Raven Ridge's inventory with the same methodical attention she gave to everything else. She knew what a .308 sounded like. What she hadn't prepared for was the way the sound felt different when you were the one pulling the trigger with a living human being in the glass. The fighter dropped. She didn't watch him fall. Kane had drilled that into her on the third morning, crouched behind her, his voice flat and patient. Don't watch the effect. Find the next problem. She found the next problem. He was moving left to right across a gap in the rocks, maybe 230 meters, using the terrain well, low and fast, the way someone moves who has done this before. She tracked him, led him by half a step, held her breath in the space between heartbeats, fired. He went down hard into the scrub. On the radio, Walker's voice. "North Ridgeline. Someone's suppressing. Who is that? Say call sign." Nobody answered. Maya was already moving the scope, quartering the darkness methodically the way she'd been taught to quarter a range, sector by sector, looking for movement that didn't belong to the terrain. The nodes on her helmet were military issue, functional but imperfect, painting the world in grainy green that made distance estimation harder than it should be. She compensated by watching the rocks instead of the spaces between them. Things in motion betray themselves against things that are still. There, a group of 3, working their way around the southern edge of the American perimeter. Walker had 2 operators covering that approach, but they were pinned by fire from a higher angle and couldn't break contact long enough to deal with the flanking threat. She shifted, calculated the angle, fired twice, one definite, one probable. "Contact south, breaking off," one of Walker's operators called over the radio. "Something's pushing them back. What is... Raven 6, who have you got on that ridgeline?" Walker's response came after a pause that lasted exactly long enough to tell her he was figuring it out in real time. "Working on it. Hold your sectors." She found the next problem. The night had a rhythm now and she was inside it. Not comfortable. She wasn't comfortable. Her knee was a steady, low scream, and her left elbow had found a sharp edge in the rock that was going to leave a bruise the size of a playing card. But inside it, the way you're inside a current without fighting it. Seeing the battlefield not as chaos, but as a system. Pressure here, movement there, the enemy's geometry revealing itself in the patterns of their fire. She'd been doing this her whole life, she realized. Reading systems, finding the logic inside complexity. She'd just never done it with bullets. 300 meters to her north, Commander Reed Walker was having the strangest professional experience of his 12-year special operations career. He was crouched behind the burned-out remnant of a carlat wall that some farmer had built and abandoned years ago, bleeding from the cut above his eye and 2 more he hadn't had time to locate yet, running calculations in his head that were not adding up the way they should. By any reasonable assessment, this position should be deteriorating. Instead, the North Ridgeline, the approach that had been the biggest threat, the one that had Shaw's rifle and was supposed to go unanswered, was going quiet. Not quiet like the enemy was repositioning. Quiet like they'd been dealt a problem they needed to think about. He keyed his radio. "Okafor." "Here, sir." "Who's on Shaw's position?" A pause. "I thought it was Evans." "Evans is on the east corner. I can see him." Another pause. Longer. "Sir, I think it's your logistical specialist?" Walker processed this information. "Say again." "Hart, sir. I saw her go up the rock about 4 minutes ago. I thought she was... I don't know what I thought she was doing." Walker looked across the destroyed interior of the perimeter. He could just make out the elevated position Shaw had been using, and the silhouette of someone lying prone behind a rifle. The silhouette was too small to be sure, too still to be panicking. The rifle was moving in the controlled, unhurried arcs of someone who knew what they were looking for. He had a lot of questions. He filed all of them under later. Okafor, get me comms with that position. She doesn't have a long-range handset, sir, just her chest radio. He switched frequencies. Hart, this is Walker. Report. A brief silence. Then her voice, quieter than he expected, and steadier. North Ridgeline is partially suppressed. 6 confirmed, 2 probable. 3 remaining movers I can see are holding in defilade behind the rock cluster at your 2 o'clock, approximately 280 meters. They're not moving up right now. Can you hold that position? A pause that might have been her assessing, or might have been her deciding whether to be honest. Ammunition is the problem. Shaw had 2 magazines up here. I'm through the first and into the second. How many rounds remaining? 14. 14 rounds. Against the better part of a company of fighters on multiple ridgelines in a valley that had been set up specifically to kill them. Walker did the math. Conserve, Ateret, he said. Don't fire unless they move. Copy. He switched back to the main net. All Raven elements, this is 6. We have sniper coverage on the north approach. Maintain your sectors. I'm calling for QRF and air support. ETA on the birds is 18 minutes. He paused. Hold this position. 18 minutes. He looked at the mountains surrounding them and thought, not for the first time, that 18 minutes in a valley like this could feel like a different unit of time entirely. The 14 rounds became 11, then 8. The fighters on the North Ridgeline weren't stupid. After the third man went down, they stopped silhouetting themselves against the sky and started using the terrain properly, which made them harder to acquire but also effectively ended their ability to push downhill. They were pinned, not retreating. There was a difference. Maya was aware of the difference. She was also aware of the conversation happening below her position, which she could hear in fragments between radio traffic, Walker's operators assessing, counting, doing the same arithmetic she was doing, and arriving at the same uncomfortable answer. The south approach was still contested. The east was quiet, which bothered her more than if it had been loud. Quiet in the wrong place usually meant someone was doing something you weren't going to like. Her knee had gone from a scream to a burn to a strange, numb warmth that probably meant something she'd deal with later. She heard Shaw before she saw him. He'd been moved to the base of the rock she was on, and he was conscious, which was better than it could have been. Someone had packed the shoulder wound and gotten a tourniquet on above it, and he was sitting against the rock with the focused, miserable expression of a man who is in significant pain and is refusing to acknowledge it as a point of professional pride. His voice came up from below her. How many you got left? She almost asked how he knew it was her. Then she remembered there was nobody else up here. 8, she said. You taking the shots or are they presenting? Bit of both. A silence. What's your distance on the north cluster? 280, give or take. Winds pushed 2 degrees east in the last 10 minutes. I've been adjusting. Another silence, longer this time. You're adjusting for wind drift at 280 in the dark, Shaw said. It wasn't quite a question. Kane taught me. Kane, she could hear him processing that. The instructor, the old guy. He's not that old. He's 56. He shoots better than anyone on this base, and you know it. Shaw didn't answer that. How many sessions? He said finally. 9. 10 if you count the group course. She heard something that might have been a laugh, quickly swallowed by the shoulder pain. He never works with anyone for 10 sessions. Not in a course this short. A pause. He must think you're something. He thinks I'm wasted counting bullets. Right now, Shaw said. I'm inclined to agree with him. It was the closest thing to a compliment she'd received since arriving at Fort Raven Ridge, and it came from a man sitting below her in the dark, bleeding through a field dressing. She didn't know what to do with it, so she went back to scanning the ridgeline. It was Okafor who spotted the RPG team. He came on the radio at a pitch that was carefully controlled, but just barely. Raven 6, I have a visual on a 2-man element with a tube. South-southwest, using the Wadi, coming fast. Range approximately 450 and closing. Walker. Can you engage? Negative, I've got no angle. They're in the cut. Where are they heading? A beat. The aircraft, sir. The downed Black Hawk. Still sitting in the open, fuel cells intact, holding the communications equipment and what remained of the demolitions package that Maya hadn't been able to move during the crash. If an RPG round hit that airframe, Walker's voice went flat in the way voices go flat when the options have narrowed to one. Heart. She was already moving the scope. I heard, she said. Can you get an angle on the wadi from your position? She looked, shifted her body 15 degrees south. The wadi cut through the valley floor about 480 meters out. She could see where it opened up, where the two men would have to emerge from cover to reach a firing position on the helicopter. Partial, she said. I'll have a window when they exit the cut. Maybe 3 seconds. How many rounds do you have? She checked. 7. The math was ugly. 480 meters, moving targets, night conditions, equipment that hadn't been zeroed for her eye relief or her trigger pull. 7 rounds to service whatever happened between now and when the QRF arrived, which was, she checked the time, still 11 minutes out. She couldn't use more than 1 on the RPG team, maybe 2, maybe. Walker, she said, I need you to know that I've never done anything close to this distance under these conditions. I know. I'm telling you because if you miss, we adapt. If you don't try, we lose the bird and probably 4 more people. His voice was even, not harsh, just factual. Your call, Hart. Her call. She settled the stock more firmly into her shoulder, found the opening of the wadi in the scope. The green-tinted world through the nods turned everything into shadows and shapes, and she had to work harder at 480 than she'd worked at any of the previous shots, calculating angles that were partly math and partly something she didn't have a word for yet. What you're doing isn't thinking, Kane had told her on the 8th morning. You're past thinking. Thinking is too slow. What you're doing is listening to information your body has already processed. Your job is to stop arguing with it. She stopped arguing. The first man came out of the wadi running, the RPG tube over his shoulder, angling toward the helicopter at a pace that said urgency without saying panic. She tracked him. The wind had shifted again. Slightly, barely, but she felt it on the back of her neck. She adjusted, held, fired. The man went down and stayed down. The tube landed in the dirt 6 feet from him. The second man stopped. Wrong move. She was already moving the crosshairs. Fired. The second man went down. For a moment there was no sound on the radio. Not because the radios had gone quiet, but because everyone on them had gone quiet, and those were different things. Then Walker's voice. Okafor, confirm. Both down, sir. RPG team is neutralized. Another silence. Then, so quietly, she almost missed it under the rotor noise that was just beginning to cut the mountain air from the north. QRF. Finally, 11 minutes exactly. Walker said, Good shooting, Hart. She didn't respond. She was too busy counting. 5 rounds left. 3 fighters on the north ridgeline still in defilade. 2 on the east approach that Okafor hadn't confirmed were gone. 11 minutes of ammunition conservation that had cost the enemy at least 8 fighters and had bought enough time for the birds to arrive. She filed the numbers. It was what she did. The QRF hit the valley like a weather system. 2 AH-64 Apaches came in low and fast from the north, their 30mm chain guns opening up on the ridgelines, with a sound that had no good comparison to anything else in human experience. Not thunder, not industrial machinery, not anything. Just a tearing, mechanical fury that made the ground shake at 400 meters. The fighters who had been pressing the south approach broke immediately. The north ridgeline cluster that Maya had been holding in place scattered, and the Apaches found 2 of them before they reached cover. It was over in less than 4 minutes. Not clean. Nothing about it was clean. But over. Maya stayed on her position for 2 more minutes after the firing stopped because Kane had told her once that the most dangerous moment in a firefight is the 30 seconds after you think it's done. She watched the ridgelines. She watched the wadi. She watched the darkness between the rocks for movement that wasn't there. Then she lowered the rifle. Her hands were shaking. They hadn't shaken during the shooting. They shook now, which she supposed made a kind of biological sense, the body processing what the mind had been too focused to feel. She looked at her hands like they belonged to someone she didn't know very well yet. She climbed down from the rock carefully because her knee had progressed from numb warmth back to a sharp, insistent pain that made the descent genuinely unpleasant. She landed in the dirt beside Shaw, who looked up at her with an expression she couldn't fully read in the dark. "You're bleeding," he said. She touched her chin, found a cut she hadn't noticed. "Oh, you're also shaking." "I know." He didn't say anything to that. He just shifted slightly, making room against the rock, and she sat down next to him in the dirt without really deciding to. The Apaches made another pass overhead, lower this time, their searchlights sweeping the valley floor. Somewhere to the north, a secondary explosion lit the mountains orange. The weapons cache, she guessed, detonating from whatever the Apaches' guns had touched off. It was a large explosion. It burned for a while. She watched it burn. "Hey," Shaw said. She looked at him. "You did good." He said it the way people say things that are true and uncomfortable at the same time. "Really good. I need you to know I'm not saying that it's not a compliment like you passed a test. What you did up there was..." He stopped, tried again. "I've been in this job for 9 years. I know what those shots were." "Don't," she said. "Don't what?" "Don't make it into something." She looked back at the burning mountains. "I need it to not be something right now." Shaw was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said. They sat there in the dirt while the valley slowly stopped being a battlefield and started being a place again. Distant shouting, radio traffic, the sound of the medevac bird that somebody must have called, coming in from the east with its running lights cutting the darkness. Someone was taking accountability of personnel. Someone else was photographing the crash site. The ordinary machinery of aftermath. Maya sat in it and tried to locate herself. She had shot 8 people tonight. Probably 8. Confirmed 6. And she was trained enough in precision to understand what confirmed meant and what it didn't mean. And she wasn't going to make herself feel better by rounding down. She had done it, and she would do it again if the geometry of the night had required it. That was the part that was going to take the longest to sit with, not the doing, but the certainty underneath the doing. The strange, cold recognition that she had been effective in a way that had surprised everyone except possibly one retired master sergeant who was back at Fort Raven Ridge sleeping through all of this. She thought about calling Kane. She thought about what she would say. She thought about his voice on the range in the early mornings, patient and blunt and relentlessly honest. And she decided that whatever she had to say to him could wait until she had found some of her own words for it first. Okafor appeared out of the darkness, moving with the slightly too careful walk of a man running on adrenaline that was starting to fade. He stopped in front of her, looked at her for a moment like he was solving a math problem. "Walker wants you," he said. "Am I in trouble?" The question came out more genuinely than she intended. Okafor blinked. "Why would you be in trouble?" "Because I left my assigned position, took up a weapon I wasn't authorized to use, and engaged targets beyond my role definition." Okafor stared at her. "You," he said carefully, "just saved the aircraft and approximately 4 of my teammates." "I know, I'm asking if I'm in trouble." He stared at her for another second, then he made a sound, not quite a laugh, but adjacent to one, and shook his head slowly. "No," he said, "you're not in trouble." He turned to go, then stopped. "For what it's worth, Hart, nobody's going to be looking at you the same way after tonight." She didn't know if that was what she wanted. She was still thinking about it when she pushed herself to her feet, tested her knee, functional, unpleasant, manageable, and followed him toward where Walker was waiting. The valley was quiet now. The mountains were burning. And somewhere in the space between who she had been 12 hours ago and whoever she was right now, Maya Hart was trying to figure out if she was still the same person, or if the woman who had climbed down off that rock was someone she'd never actually met before tonight. Walker was standing by the downed helicopter, a flashlight in one hand and a radio in the other, talking in the low, efficient tones of a man who has 17 things happening simultaneously. He saw her coming and held up 2 fingers, 2 minutes, and went back to his radio. She waited. She was good at waiting. She'd always been good at waiting. She just hadn't known until tonight exactly what she'd been waiting for. Walker finished his radio call, clicked off the handset, and looked at her for a long moment without speaking. The flashlight was pointed at the ground between them, throwing the kind of upward shadows that made everyone look like a different version of themselves. Behind him, the downed Black Hawk sat in the valley floor like something that had fallen from a significant height, which it had, its fuselage reflecting the orange glow still coming off the burning weapons cache in the mountains. "Walk with me," he said. It wasn't a question. She fell in beside him, matching his pace, her knee making every step a small negotiation. They walked the perimeter of the crash site in silence for about 30 seconds, long enough that she started wondering if this was actually a formal reprimand delivered informally, which was a thing that happened in the army, which was an institution that had developed many creative ways to communicate displeasure. "How long has Kane been working with you?" Walker said. 10 sessions, outside the group course. "He cleared this with anyone?" "I don't know what he cleared with anyone. He asked if I wanted to shoot. I said yes. Walker nodded slowly. He did that, she was learning. Nodded at information the way other people nodded at weather, acknowledging it without committing to a reaction. What's your APFT score? He said. 91. Marksmanship qual. Expert. Both times. Both times? He stopped walking. She stopped beside him. He was looking at the mountains where the fire was beginning to die down to a lower, redder burn. Why logistics? The question came out of nowhere and landed somewhere specific. It was what was available, she said. Available when? When I enlisted, I needed the signing bonus. Logistics had a better bonus than infantry, and I... She stopped. I didn't think it mattered what I picked. I thought I was just going to serve my contract and go home. Walker looked at her. What were you going home to do? She didn't have a good answer for that. The honest answer was that she hadn't known, which was part of why the enlistment had seemed like a reasonable idea at the time. She'd been 21, working a warehouse job in Bakersfield that paid $11 an hour and had no ceiling, and the Army recruiter had sat across from her at a Denny's and talked about purpose and structure and the signing bonus, and she'd thought, at least it's something with a shape. I don't know, she said. Walker took that in, nodded at it. Get some rest, he said. Medevac will move Shaw and 2 others out in about an hour. You'll be on the second bird back to Raven Ridge. Yes, sir. She turned to go. Hart? She stopped. Whatever you think tonight was, Walker said. Whatever you need it to be right now to get through it, that's fine. But when you're back at Raven Ridge and you've slept and you're ready to talk about what it actually was, come find me. She didn't know what to say to that either. She said, yes, sir, again, and walked back toward the perimeter. Fort Raven Ridge, 0640 hours. The base looked exactly the same. That was the thing that got her. Walking through the gate with her kit hanging off her in ways it hadn't been hanging when she'd left, Shaw's rifle slung across her back because there had been no protocol for what to do with it, and she'd simply carried it out the way she'd carried everything else, out of the instinct to account for every item on the manifest. The supply depot was where she'd left it. The motor pool was where she'd left it. The mess hall was beginning its breakfast rotation, and the smell of powdered eggs and industrial coffee drifted across the compound in a way that felt surreal against everything that had happened in the valley. Ruiz was waiting at the gate. She didn't ask how he knew which bird she'd be on. He had sources for things like that. It was one of the things that made him valuable and mildly annoying in equal measure. He looked at her. At the rifle on her back. At the dried blood on her chin and the knee she was favoring. At whatever was in her face that she wasn't fully controlling. He didn't say, I told you you'd be fine, which she appreciated more than she could quantify. He said, you eaten? No. Come on. They sat in a corner of the mess hall that was still empty at this hour, 2 trays between them, and she ate without tasting anything, and Ruiz talked about nothing in particular. Some issue with a vehicle in the motor pool, a poker game the night before that had gone sideways when someone accused someone else of marking cards. And she let the words wash past her like water, not processing them, but using them as a kind of ground noise that kept the valley at a manageable distance. She was halfway through her second cup of coffee when Ruiz stopped talking. She looked up. Kane was standing at the entrance to the mess hall in his brown t-shirt and BDU trousers, a cup of coffee in one hand, scanning the room with the unhurried patience of someone who has spent years finding targets in terrain that didn't want to give them up. He found her. He crossed the room and sat down across from her without asking, which was on brand. He looked at the rifle leaning against the bench beside her, looked at her face, the cut on her chin, the 1,000-yard flatness in her eyes that she was trying to pull back from and not quite succeeding. He picked up his coffee and drank from it. Sure, he said. Shoulder. He'll keep the arm. Anyone else serious? Kowalski took some frag in the leg. 2 others bumped up, nothing surgical. Kane nodded, set his cup down. You took his position, he said. Not a question. Someone had to. How many? She looked at her tray. 8. Confirmed 6. Silence. The mess hall was starting to fill up around them. Morning shift, people who had slept, people who had no idea what the valley looked like at 3 in the morning when everything was burning and moving and coming apart at the seams. You okay? Kane said. The simplicity of the question was almost offensive. She opened her mouth to say yes, which was what you said, and then something stopped her. I don't know yet, she said. He nodded like that was the correct answer. Good, he said. If you were okay right now, I'd be worried. Ruiz, who had been watching this exchange with the careful expression of a man who has correctly identified that he is not part of this conversation, stood up with his tray. I'm gonna... He gestured vaguely toward the rest of the world. Yeah. He left. Kane waited until he was gone. Walker called me, he said, before you landed. What did he say? He said he needed to understand what he was looking at. Kane wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. I told him what I've been telling you for the last 2 weeks. He didn't quite believe me until last night, which is understandable because most people wouldn't. What does that mean? It means he's going to want to talk to you about options. He already said that. Not options like, what do you need to decompress? Kane looked at her directly. Options like what comes next, professionally. She put her cup down. The mess hall noise moved around them. Someone laughed too loudly at the next table. The coffee machine behind the serving line made its grinding complaint. I'm a 92 alpha, she said. Not after last night, you're not. Kane. I'm not the one who decides that. Walker is. But I'll tell you what I told him. What I've been watching for 29 years of doing this. There are people who can learn to shoot, and there's a much smaller group of people who can shoot and read a battle space in real time and stay functional under fire and make decisions in the 3-second windows that everything depends on. He paused. The second group is rare enough that when you find one, you don't put her back in a supply depot. She stared at him. I shot 8 people, she said. I don't feel like... She stopped, tried again. I don't feel like whoever you're describing. I know, he said. That's also how I know I'm right. She slept for 6 hours, dreamless, which she hadn't expected, and woke up at 1400 hours to 3 missed radio check-ins from Sergeant Briggs about the ammunition requisition form, and 1 message from Walker marked when you're ready. She lay on her bunk for a while, staring at the ceiling the way she had before the mission, but it felt different now. The ceiling was the same. She was the variable that had changed. She thought about Bakersfield, the warehouse, the recruiter at the Denny's, the signing bonus that had seemed like the point at the time. She thought about being invisible. She thought about how you could spend your whole life being unremarkable at yourself. She got up, washed the dried blood off her chin, changed into a clean uniform, and went to see Walker. His office was small and aggressively functional. A metal desk, a tactical map on one wall, 2 chairs that had never been comfortable and had given up pretending. He was behind the desk with a folder open in front of him, and he waved her into the chair across from him without looking up. She sat. He closed the folder. How's the knee? Functional? PA should look at it. I'll schedule it. He looked at her. Then he opened the folder again and slid it across the desk toward her. She looked at it without touching it. It was her personnel file, or most of it. On top was a sheet she didn't recognize, with a letterhead she recognized very well. United States Army Special Operations Command. Beneath the letterhead was her name, her service number, and a block of text that her brain processed in pieces because it was trying to decide which part to disbelieve first. That's a recommendation packet, Walker said, for the Special Operations Target Interdiction course. She kept her face still. SOTIC, the Army's Advanced Sniper Program, the one that took qualified sniper-designated soldiers and turned them into something else entirely, the one that had a washout rate somewhere north of 60%, even for people who arrived with proper credentials and years of practice. I don't have a sniper MOS, she said. That's correctable. I've had 10 training sessions with a retired instructor on a base range, and last night in a live combat situation you engaged 8 targets across a range of 50 to 480 meters in near zero visibility conditions and achieved a confirmed kill rate of 75%. Walker's voice was flat. Not impressed flat, fact flat. Do you know what the average rate is for trained snipers in active operations? She did know, actually, because she'd read the logistics assessments for ammunition expenditure versus confirmed engagements as part of her inventory work. Numbers were numbers. Roughly similar, she said carefully. You're not trained, Walker said. That's the point. She looked back at the folder. What are you asking me to do? She said. I'm asking you to consider it. The packet goes in on my signature. You still have to qualify, pass the course. The washout rate is over 60%. Yes? For people who've been doing this for years. Yes. She looked at him. Why? She said. Not why is this a good idea. I understand the argument. Why are you doing this? You don't know me. Before yesterday, I was the person who counted your ammunition. Walker was quiet for a moment. He had a way of being quiet that felt like computation rather than hesitation, like he was selecting from a set of possible answers rather than searching for one. I've been in special operations for 12 years, he said. In that time, I've worked with approximately 400 different personnel in various capacities. He leaned forward slightly, elbows on the desk. I've seen maybe 6 people who had what you have. The ability to be inside chaos and see it as a system, to stay cold in exactly the moment when cold is impossible. He paused. The others were all identified early. They were trained for it. They had years to develop it. He looked at her. You just had it. Raw, untrained, never used before. And you used it last night like it was the most natural thing in the world. She didn't answer. What I'm asking, he said, is whether you want to find out how far it goes. The question sat in the room between them. She thought about Shaw sitting in the dirt below her position, listening to her correct for wind drift at 280 meters in the dark. She thought about the way he'd said he must think you're something, and how she hadn't known what to do with that. She thought about 8 people who had come down off that ridgeline and were not going back up it. She thought about this girl in Bakersfield who had picked logistics because it was what was available. I need to think about it, she said. Take the time you need. Walker pulled the folder back across the desk. But Hart, he stopped her as she stood. What you did last night wasn't luck. I've seen luck. Luck doesn't adjust for wind drift. Luck doesn't read a flanking movement from 400 meters in the dark and counter it before the lead element knows it's coming. He looked at her steadily. Whatever you decide, I need you to know that. She nodded. She left his office and walked out into the afternoon sun, which was doing what the Afghan sun did in the afternoon, which was try to flatten everything under it into the ground. She stood in the middle of the compound for a moment, blinking. Ruiz appeared from the direction of the motor pool, apparently by the same instinct that had put him at the gate this morning. He stopped a few feet away and read her face. Good meeting or bad meeting? He said. Complicated meeting. Walker complicated or normal complicated? Walker complicated. He made a face. That's the worst kind. He fell in beside her as she started walking, not asking where. You want to tell me about it? She thought about it. He wants to put me in for SOTIC, she said. Ruiz stopped walking. She kept walking for 3 more steps before she noticed and stopped too, turned around. He was staring at her. The sniper school, he said. Yeah. The one that 60+% washout, yeah, I know. He stared at her a moment longer. Something moved through his expression that she couldn't quite categorize. It wasn't surprise exactly, or maybe it was surprise colliding with something that had been waiting underneath for a while. Maya, he said, don't. I'm not. I'm just... He exhaled. Last night, what did you actually do out there? She looked at him. I counted, she said, and then I shot. He blinked. That's all it was, she said. Not dismissively. She meant it exactly. It's the same thing. Numbers, positions, patterns. I've been doing it my whole life. She stopped, found the words. I just didn't know what it was for. Ruiz was quiet for a moment. Are you going to do it? He said. The school? She looked up at the mountains on the northern horizon. The same mountains that had been burning last night and were now just mountains again, doing nothing, giving nothing away. I don't know, she said. That was true. What was also true? And she was only beginning to understand it, like reading a word you know, but have never said out loud. Was that she had already started becoming the answer, whether she'd decided yet or not. The woman who had climbed that rock last night was not the woman who had been counting lot numbers in a supply depot the morning before. Those 2 women were connected by a name and a service number and a face in a mirror. But something had broken open between them, and she didn't know if broken open was the right description or if cracked the surface was better, or if the word she was actually looking for was started. Something had started. She went to find the PA about her knee. She filed the ammunition discrepancy report that had been waiting since before the mission. She ate dinner alone in the supply depot, sitting on a crate with her back against the shelving unit, the requisition folder in her lap, a pen in her hand, going through numbers that needed to be exact. At 2100 hours, Kane knocked on the open door of the depot. She didn't look up. Come in. He came in, sat on the opposite crate, said nothing. She finished the column she was on, set the clipboard down. Walker showed me the packet, she said. I know. Did you know he was going to do that? I suggested he consider it. She looked at him. You suggested, she said. I'm a retired master sergeant with a bum shoulder and no operational role. Suggesting is currently my primary skill set. He didn't smile, but something in his face allowed for the possibility. What I told him was that if he didn't at least put the option in front of you, he was going to spend the rest of his career wondering what he let walk out of that valley. She thought about that. It's a 60% washout rate, she said, for the average candidate. I don't have the baseline qualifications. Walker can exception to policy the MOS requirement. He has the authority. And if I wash out? Kane looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who has decided to be honest rather than comfortable. Then you wash out, he said, and you go back to counting bullets and you spend the rest of your career knowing you tried. He paused. But Maya, I've been doing this for 29 years. I've trained more candidates than I can count. He leaned forward slightly. I've never once told someone they should do this course and been wrong. The depot was quiet around them, the smell of rust and diesel, the shelving units standing in their rows like a small, bureaucratic forest. She picked up the clipboard, looked at the numbers, put it back down. You need an answer tonight? She said. No. Good. She looked at the shelving unit across from her, at the neat rows of inventory she had organized and catalogued and maintained with the precise, joyless dedication of someone who is very good at a job that is not the point. Because I need to figure out something first. What? She thought about how to say it. Whether I'm scared of washing out, she said finally, or scared of finding out I'm actually good enough. She paused. Because those are different problems. Kane was quiet for a long moment. Yeah, he said. They are. He picked up his coffee, stood up, moved toward the door. Kane? He stopped. Thank you, she said. For the mornings, he nodded once with the minimal economy of a man who has never been good at receiving things like that. Don't thank me yet, he said. Thank me when you graduate. He left. Maya sat alone in the depot for another hour. The numbers on the clipboard stayed exactly what they were. The shelving units did not change. The smell of the place was the same smell it had always been. She was the only thing in the room that was different. She picked up the pen and wrote her name on the first line of the form that had been sitting at the bottom of her top drawer for 2 days. The one she hadn't let herself look at directly since Walker had handed it to her. The one with the SOCOM letterhead and her service number, and the blank spaces that were waiting for exactly this. Her handwriting was neat, which it always was. Her hand was steady, which surprised her. She finished the form, set it on the desk, turned off the light, walked out. The form sat on the desk overnight. In the morning it was still there, which was not a surprise, but somehow seeing it in daylight made it more real than it had felt in the dark. Her name in the first line, the SOCOM letterhead, catching the early sun coming through the single narrow window above the desk. She'd been half expecting to walk back in and find that she'd imagined writing it. The way you sometimes imagine doing something so clearly that the doing of it feels like a memory. She hadn't imagined it. She picked it up, put it in a manila envelope, and walked it to Walker's office before she could have a productive conversation with herself about all the reasons not to. His door was open. He was already at his desk, which either meant he'd been there all night, or he was the kind of person who arrived before the building was ready for him. She didn't knock. She just held the envelope out across the threshold. He looked at it, looked at her. You sure? He said. No, she said, but I'm doing it anyway. He took the envelope. He didn't open it. He set it on the corner of his desk in a way that suggested it would be acted on before the morning was done. Give me 3 days to process it, he said. In the meantime, I need you in a debrief at 0900. Join intelligence here on base. They want to talk through the Blackstone Valley engagement. All of it? Specifically the sniper activity. He paused in a way that told her something was coming. There are questions about the source of the intelligence compromise. She'd been thinking about that since the helicopter. The ambush had been too positioned. The fighters had known the timing of the insertion, which meant they'd known the mission, which meant someone had talked to someone who had talked to someone else, and now the machinery of accountability was going to start turning, which was how it always worked, which was slow and necessary and occasionally pointed at the wrong people. Am I a subject or a witness? She said. Witness. But Hart, he looked at her directly, Lieutenant Colonel Marsh is running the debrief. He's JCOC. He's going to ask about your role in the engagement, and he's not going to like the answer, and I need you to understand that before you walk in there. Why isn't he going to like it? Because the answer creates paperwork he didn't anticipate, and Marsh has a well-documented discomfort with things that weren't in his original plan. She thought about that. Understood, she said. The debrief was in Conference Room B, which was the smaller and worse conference room on the base, the one with the table leg that wobbled and the air conditioning unit that made a sound like a small animal in distress every 40 seconds. There were 6 people in the room when she arrived, exactly at 0900. Walker against the far wall with his arms crossed. Okafor beside him, in uniform, looking like he'd slept about as well as she had. 2 intelligence analysts she didn't recognize, both with laptops and the particular flat effect expression of people whose job is to process other people's worst nights into data. A JAG officer in the corner, whose presence she logged and didn't comment on. And Lieutenant Colonel Marsh at the head of the table. He was 50-something, grey at the temples, with the compact, contained physicality of a man who had once been fit and was now fit in a different and more deliberate way. He had the face of someone who had spent a career making decisions and was used to those decisions being correct and being acknowledged as such. He looked at Maya when she walked in the way people look at something that is not where they expected it to be. "Specialist Hart," he said. "Yes, sir. Sit down." She sat across from the analysts. Walker stayed on the wall. Okafor pulled out a chair beside her, which she appreciated more than she showed. Marsh opened a folder, read something in it, closed it. "Walk me through your role in the Blackstone Valley operation," he said. She walked him through it. Logistical specialist, equipment accountability, voluntary attachment to the chalk. She kept it factual and sequential, which was how she processed things anyway, and she watched him listen in the particular way senior officers listen when they are already forming a response and the listening is partly procedural. When she got to the part where Shaw went down, he held up a hand. "Stop there," he said. "You left your assigned position." "Yes, sir." "Without orders." There was no one available to give orders relative to that specific situation. Commander Walker was managing the perimeter, Sergeant Shaw was incapacitated, the rifle was unattended, and you decided unilaterally to pick it up. I decided that the alternative was to leave it there while the North Ridgeline came down on our position. Yes, sir. Marsh looked at her. It was a specific kind of look. Not hostile exactly, but the kind of look that is thinking about how to become hostile if the next few minutes go a certain way. "You're a 92 Alpha," he said. "Yes, sir." "Automated logistical specialist." "Yes, sir." "Not a sniper." "No, sir." "Not a designated marksman." "No, sir." "Not, to my knowledge, trained in any capacity to perform the activities you are describing." She paused. "I've been working with Master Sergeant Kane," she said. "Retired. He's been running marksmanship sessions on Range 7 as part of the JSOC Skills Exchange." Marsh looked at Walker. Walker's expression did not change. "Kane," Marsh said, returning to her. "The instructor." "Yes, sir." "How many sessions?" 10. Marsh wrote something down, put his pen on the table, folded his hands. "Specialist Hart, I want to be precise about something. What you are describing is an enlisted soldier with no relevant MOS, no sniper qualification, and a total of 10 informal training sessions with a retired NCO, performing precision engagement operations in a live combat environment at distances up to 480 meters. He paused. "Does that sound right to you?" "That's an accurate summary, sir." "And you confirmed 6 kills?" "Yes, sir." He looked at the folder again, not because there was something new in it, because he needed a moment to assemble whatever he was going to say next. "I'm going to be honest with you," he said, which in Maya's experience was a phrase most often used immediately before someone was about to be somewhat dishonest. "What you're describing, if accurate, raises questions I find difficult to process through standard channels." "What questions, sir?" "Questions about how an undertrained specialist happened to perform at a level that exceeds what most credentialed snipers achieve in combat. Questions about liability. Questions about the chain of command decision that put you in that position in the first place." He looked at Walker when he said the last part. "And questions about what precedent this creates going forward." One of the analysts cleared her throat very quietly and opened her laptop. "Sir," the analyst said, Her name tag read Chen. "I can pull the ISR footage from the QRF Apaches. They had their cameras running when they came into the valley. There's about 4 minutes of coverage that includes the North Ridgeline engagement." Marsh looked at her. "Pull it." Chen turned her laptop around. The footage was grainy and green, the same night vision palette as everything else that night, shot from above and at an angle. But the North Ridgeline was clearly visible, and clearly visible on the elevated rock was a figure, small, prone, working a rifle in the methodical, unhurried sequence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The first fighter was visible moving down the ridgeline slope. Then he wasn't, then the second, then he wasn't. The third was harder to see, behind cover, and there was a longer pause before the shot, maybe 4 seconds, and then he wasn't visible either. Marsh watched the footage without expression. It ran for 3 minutes and 40 seconds. When it finished, the room was quiet except for the air conditioning unit making its sound. "That's her?" Marsh said. "Process of elimination, sir," Okafor said from beside Maya. It was the first time he'd spoken. "Shaw was down at the base of the rock. The rest of the chalk was on the south and east. No one else was on that position." Another silence. Marsh looked at Maya. "How many sessions did you say?" 10, sir." He picked up his pen, put it down again. "Captain Walker," he said, "tell me you have an explanation for this." Walker pushed off the wall he'd been leaning against. He moved to the table but didn't sit, which was a statement of its own. "Some people have an aptitude for it, sir. Hart has an extraordinary spatial intelligence, exceptional patience, and a natural ability to read movement patterns under pressure. Master Sergeant Kane identified it and worked with her. Last night, circumstance required her to use it." He paused. "The results speak for themselves." "The results," Marsh said, "are going to require me to write a report that explains how a logistics specialist shot 8 combatants at ranges up to 480 in a combat environment with no formal qualification." He looked at Maya. "Do you understand that what you did, however effective, was technically outside your authorized role?" "Yes, sir." "And you proceeded anyway?" "People were going to die, sir." The sentence landed flat and factual, which was how she'd meant it. Not defensive, not dramatic, just true, the way numbers were true. Marsh looked at her for a long moment. She held the look, not aggressively, she just didn't look away. "I've submitted a packet for Hart for SOTIC consideration," Walker said. Marsh's eyes moved to him. "When?" "This morning." "On whose authority?" "Mine, sir. Under exception to policy for demonstrated field performance, the regulation allows it." Marsh's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. He picked up the folder and put it down again. "SOTIC, he said. "Yes, sir." "The advanced course?" "Yes, sir. For a 92 Alpha with 10 sessions of informal training. For someone who just demonstrated combat effectiveness at a level that qualifies her for consideration, sir. The regulation doesn't specify MOS as a barrier to exception to policy admission. It specifies demonstrated performance." Marsh looked at Walker the way people look at someone who has just used a rule they wrote against them. "That regulation was intended for credentialed soldiers in adjacent roles," he said. "It doesn't say that, sir." A silence that had an edge to it. "Captain Walker," Marsh said carefully, "are you aware of the optics of recommending an unqualified logistics specialist for special operations training based on a single combat incident?" "I'm aware of the optics of not recommending a soldier who performed at this level," Walker said, "and of what that would say about how we identify and develop talent in this command." Marsh looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Maya. She waited. "The packet goes through proper channels," he said finally. "I'm not blocking it. But I want a full psychological evaluation, a physical assessment, and a formal skills evaluation from a qualified instructor, not Kane, a current active duty instructor, before it advances." He paused. "And I want it understood that the exception to policy pathway means she carries no presumption of success. If she cannot meet the standards of the program, she returns to her MOS without prejudice." "Understood, sir," Walker said. "Hart." Marsh looked at her one more time. There was something in his face that wasn't quite respect, but was in the general neighborhood, the way you look at a problem that turned out to be more interesting than you expected. "How old are you?" 24, sir." He wrote something in the folder. "Get the evaluations done, he said. Dismissed. She passed the psychological evaluation on a Thursday, which the evaluating psychiatrist, a major named Osei, described as unremarkable, which was the highest compliment the evaluation process was capable of producing. Osei had an office that smelled like paper and something herbal he burned in a small dish on his windowsill. He was in his late 30s, careful and precise, with the particular quality of attentiveness that made you feel like what you were saying was being taken seriously without being transcribed for evidence. They talked for 2 hours over 2 sessions. He asked about the valley. She told him. He asked how she slept. She told him that too. Honestly, because dishonesty in a psych eval served no one, and because she had a practical relationship with honesty that she'd developed over a childhood in which the truth was usually more manageable than the alternatives. On the second session, he asked, almost offhandedly, why logistics? She'd been answering that question a lot lately. It was what was available, she said. Available as in the only option, or available as in the path of least resistance? She looked at him. Both, she said. I was good at numbers and I needed the money, and I didn't think I was the kind of person who was good at anything else. What changed? Someone looked at me differently. Kane. Yeah. Osei wrote something. And that felt uncomfortable, she said. It felt uncomfortable. It's easier to be what people expect. He looked up from his notes. But you signed the form, he said. I signed the form. Why? She thought about it the way she thought about a lot of things, honestly, without dressing it up. Because the night in the valley, when I was behind that rifle, she stopped, found the words. It was the first time in my life I wasn't afraid of being seen, she paused, and I don't know if I can walk away from that. Osei looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who is not going to say that's the right answer, but whose face is saying it anyway. He wrote something else. She was cleared for advancement 3 days later. The skills evaluation was different. It was conducted on Range 7, which had a specific and now complicated meaning for her. In the early morning when the air was still cool and the light was flat and forgiving. The evaluating instructor was a master sergeant named Briley, late 30s, compact, with a demeanor that said he had not asked for this assignment and was not going to pretend otherwise. He had reviewed her file before she arrived. She could tell because of the way he looked at her when she walked up to the firing line. The look of someone who has read something unbelievable and is waiting to see if reality matches the documentation. You're the one from Blackstone Valley, he said. Yes, Sergeant. Kane's student. Yes, Sergeant. He looked at the rifle in her hands, Shaw's rifle, which she'd been authorized to keep for the evaluation because it was the system she'd used in the field, and changing it for the assessment would introduce variables that served no one. You know, Kane trained me, Briley said, before his shoulder. She hadn't known that. He didn't mention it, she said. He wouldn't. Something moved through Briley's expression that was not quite warmth, but was adjacent to history. He never talked about his students, said it created bias. He looked at the target line. All right, 300-meter prone supported, 5 rounds. Show me your natural point of aim before you load. She showed him. He adjusted her left elbow 3 millimeters without explanation and then stepped back. Load and fire when ready, he said. She loaded, settled, found the scope picture she'd found 100 times now, on this exact range, the texture of it familiar in a way she hadn't expected, the way the morning light sat on the target, the slight crosswind that came from the northwest at this hour, the way the stock sat differently against her shoulder than it had against Shaw's because she was built differently and the fit wasn't perfect and had never been perfect, and she'd learnt to work around it rather than with it. She fired 5 rounds. Briley walked down to pull the target. He walked back with it and held it up without expression. 4 rounds inside a 3-inch group. 1 slightly high and left, the first shot, before she'd settled. He looked at the target for a moment. 500, he said. They went to 500. Then 6. At 600 meters, with a wind that had shifted twice during the session and light that was changing as the sun climbed, she put 3 of 5 inside a 4-inch group and 1 clean miss outside, that she felt the moment she broke the trigger. The follow-through had been wrong. She'd anticipated instead of observed, which was a thing that happened and which Kane had told her would happen until she'd done it enough times to stop anticipating. She called the miss before Briley said anything. 4, she said. The 3rd shot was off. I felt it. He looked at her. You called it, he said. Yes. Before I confirmed. Yes, he walked the target back to the bench, set it down, looked at it again. How many sessions, he said. 10? He was quiet for a moment. When Kane trained me, he said, I had 14 sessions before he told me I was ready for formal qualification. He looked at the target. He's never run a short course on someone. Never. He's pathologically patient, which is a personality flaw if you're a human being and an asset if you're a shooting instructor. He looked at her. If he ran 10 sessions with you, it's because 10 was all you needed. She didn't say anything. I'm going to tell you something, he said, and his voice had shifted slightly, the professional flatness acquiring something that wasn't quite an edge, but was closer to honest. The people who come through the evaluation process with credentials and experience and years of practice, a lot of them can shoot. A smaller number can shoot and read terrain. A smaller number than that can do both under fire. He paused. What you did in Blackstone Valley, I've read the ISR footage analysis, I've talked to Okafor, I've talked to Walker. What you did at 480 meters on a moving target in combat conditions. He stopped himself, regrouped. I've met 3 people in my career who I would say had a genuine gift for this. Not trained ability, gift. She waited. Kane thinks you're one of them, he said. And Kane has been wrong about approximately nothing in 30 years. She looked at the target on the bench, at the group that was good but not perfect, at the one miss that she'd called before he had to. My group at 600 is inconsistent, she said. Yes? That's a training problem. Yes? Which the course would fix. If you graduate, he looked at her steadily, which you might not. The course is not kind to people who haven't built the physical foundation. Your upper body strength relative to the rifle weight is going to be a problem. Your knee is going to be a problem. The sleep deprivation component is going to be a problem. He listed these items the way she listed inventory, methodically, without judgment. You understand that exception to policy doesn't mean exception to the standards. I understand. The other candidates are going to know you came through a side door. Some of them are going to make that your problem. I've been the person everyone overlooked my whole life, but she said. I'm used to people underestimating me. Briley looked at her. That's not the same thing, he said. Being overlooked is one kind of weight. Being watched and wanting you to fail is another. He held her eyes. Can you carry both? She thought about this girl in Bakersfield, the warehouse, the Denny's, the recruiter who had looked at her like she was a body that needed a slot, not a person who needed a purpose. She thought about every room she had ever been invisible in, every table where her presence was noticed and immediately filed under not relevant. Yes, she said. Briley held her gaze for another moment. Then he picked up his notebook. Evaluation complete, he said. I'll have my written assessment to Walker by end of day. He walked back toward the range office. She started breaking down the firing position. Her hands were steady. Her knee ached. Her group at 600 had been inconsistent. She thought about all 3 of those things with equal attention, because equal attention was the only honest way to hold them. The things that were working and the things that weren't, with no hierarchy between them. Just data. She needed to fix her 600-meter group. That was a training problem. She was good at solving training problems. Walker called her into his office 4 days after the evaluation. He had 2 folders this time. He opened neither of them immediately. He just looked at her with his calculation behind the eyes expression for a moment and then said, Evaluation came back clean. Osei cleared you. Briley, he paused. Briley's report was 3 pages, which for Briley is a novel. He doesn't write 3 pages for anything. What did it say? It said, and I'm summarizing, that your technical foundation is incomplete, but your operational instincts are exceptional, and your ability to self-diagnose error in real time is the most sophisticated he's seen in a candidate at your experience level. Walker opened the first folder. It also said your 600-meter group needs work. I know. He recommended advancement. He looked at her. Marsh countersigned this morning. She absorbed that. When? She said. 6 weeks, Fort Liberty. You'll travel commercial to Fayetteville and check in on a Sunday. He slid the second folder across the desk. Read this tonight. It's a prep guide. Physical standards, equipment list, course structure overview. He paused. The knee needs to be 100% by the time you get there. Work with the PA. Yes, sir. He leaned back. Something shifted in the controlled efficiency of his posture, but not much, but enough. How are you doing? He said. Not operationally, actually. She thought about it. Still processing, she said. The valley. That's normal. I know. She looked at the folder. It's not what I expected it to feel like. I expected it to feel like more of something. More of what? I don't know, just more. She paused. It feels very quiet when I think about it, like the volume is turned all the way down. Walker nodded slowly. That's the serious version, he said. Some people process combat loud. Some process it quiet. The quiet ones usually have better long-term outcomes if they talk to someone. I talked to Osei. Talk to him again. Voluntary. He's available. She picked up the folder. Walker, she said, why did you request logistics on a night raid? He looked at her. Genuinely, she said, before the mission. You asked for a specialist by name. Why me specifically? He was quiet for a moment. I didn't ask for you by name, he said. I asked for the best logistical specialist currently attached to this base. Briggs gave me your name. He paused. He said you were the most precise person in the department. She thought about that. That's all it was, she said. That's all it was. He held her eyes. Sometimes the most important thing that happens to you starts as an administrative decision. She stood up, tucked the folder under her arm. Thank you, she said, for the packet. Thank me when you graduate. She stopped at the door. Kane said the same thing, she said. Walker almost smiled. It was a very small, almost, barely visible, the kind that lives on a face for less than a second and then knows better. Kane usually does, he said. She walked out into the afternoon. The sun was doing what it did. The mountains were just mountains. She had 6 weeks. She opened the prep guide on her bunk that night and read it twice, beginning to end, making notes in the margins in her precise, unhurried handwriting. Physical benchmarks, equipment weights, course timeline, the things she needed to strengthen, the things she was already carrying. The list of things she needed to fix was longer than the list of things she had. She'd expected that. She set the guide on the desk beside the empty clipboard. She'd finished all her inventory that afternoon, down to the last lot number, everything accounted for, everything in its place, and turned off the light. In the dark, lying on her bunk, she thought about the first morning on Range 7. The 5 rounds through the group that had made Kane go quiet. The way he'd looked at her like a door he wasn't expecting to find. She thought about what Briley had said. 3 people in my career. She turned it over. She wasn't sure she was one of them. She wasn't sure she wasn't. The honest answer was that she had no idea what she was, which was terrifying. And also, she was only just beginning to understand this, the most interesting thing that had ever happened to her. 6 weeks. She closed her eyes. She started running numbers in the dark the way she always had. The way she'd been doing since she was 7 years old at her mother's kitchen table. But this time the numbers were distances, wind speeds, elevation adjustments, and somewhere in the mathematics of what was coming, she found the shape of something she didn't have a word for yet. Not confidence, not certainty, something quieter and more durable than either. She held onto it and slept. The 6 weeks moved the way hard things move. Slowly at first, then all at once. Maya spent the first 2 running herself into the ground on purpose. She was up before 0500 every morning, out on the track with her knee taped and her lungs arguing, and the Afghan sky still dark overhead. 4 miles, then 6, then 8. Not fast. The knee wouldn't allow fast, not yet, but consistent, which was the thing the PA had told her mattered more at this stage than speed. Build the base. Don't blow the joint before you get there. She didn't blow the joint. She iced it every night and did the prescribed exercises with the same methodical attention she gave to everything else, and by the end of the 3rd week she was running 8 miles without the tape. She spent her afternoons on Range 7, working through the prep guide's marksmanship benchmarks with the borrowed rifle and the notes she'd made in the margins, and the accumulated knowledge of 10 sessions with Kane folded into muscle memory she was still consolidating. The 600-meter group was the problem. It was always the problem. Not because she couldn't hit at 600, she could, most of the time, but because most of the time was not the standard the course required, and she knew the difference between most of the time and every time, and she knew which one the program was going to test her on. She worked it until her shoulder ached and her eye burned from the scope and the light was gone, and Range 7 was just a dark strip of ground with targets she couldn't see anymore. Then she went back and did it again the next morning. Kane watched sometimes from the edge of the range, saying nothing. She'd look up and he'd be there with his coffee and his presence and his silence, and then she'd look up again and he'd be gone. She didn't ask him for corrections. He didn't offer them. They had both apparently decided, without discussing it, that this part of the process was hers. On the last Thursday before she left, she put 5 rounds inside a 3-inch group at 600 meters, in wind, at dusk. She held the target and looked at it for a long time. Then she rolled it up and took it with her, because she'd earned it, and there was no rule that said she couldn't. Fort Liberty, Fayetteville, North Carolina. She arrived on a Sunday afternoon in October, when the Carolina air was doing something it didn't do in Kandahar, which was carry actual moisture and the smell of actual trees. She checked in at the designated building, received her room assignment and her administrative packet, and was standing in the hallway reading the course schedule when she heard the voice. "Your heart." She turned. He was tall, early 30s, with the particular self-possession of someone who has been told he's exceptional enough times that it has settled into his posture. Staff Sergeant Aaron Vega. She knew his name because his name was on the roster she'd received with her packet, and she'd read the roster the way she read everything, completely and once. He wasn't looking at her the way most people looked at her, which was through or past. He was looking at her specifically, which meant he'd read the roster too, and had found her name notable in a particular way. "Yeah," she said. "92 Alpha," he said. "Yeah." He looked at her for a moment, not hostile, something more calibrated than hostile. The look of someone who has decided to wait and see, but who has also decided that wait and see has a specific timeline. "Vega," he said. "I know. 11 Bravo, 4 years designated marksman, 2 operational deployments." He paused. "This is my second attempt at the course." She knew that too. It was in the roster notes. "I washed out in week 4 last time," he said. Not defensively, just as information. "Sleep deprivation component. My shot discipline went to hell on day 3 of no sleep, and I never got it back." She wasn't sure why he was telling her this. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because I'm going to need to know if you can actually shoot or if you're here on a story." He held her eyes. "The story of the logistics specialist from Blackstone Valley has made some rounds. People have opinions about it." "What kind of opinions?" "The kind that say one combat engagement under specific circumstances isn't a qualification." She considered that. "They're not wrong," she said. He blinked. Apparently that wasn't the answer he'd been prepared for. "But here I am anyway," she said, "so we'll find out." He looked at her for another moment, then something in his face settled into a different configuration. Not warm exactly, but less calculated. "Yeah," he said. "We will." The course was designed to break people who were almost good enough. That was the thing she understood in the first week. The standard wasn't impossible. It was just set precisely at the level where effort alone couldn't carry you, and talent alone couldn't carry you, and only the combination of both, applied consistently under conditions that made consistency feel like a cruel joke, would get you through. There were 14 candidates. By the end of the first week, there were 11. The 3 who left went quietly, which was its own kind of difficult to watch. No drama, no argument, just a conversation with the lead instructor, a master sergeant named Dalton, and then they were packing their gear. Dalton was 45 years old and built like a geometric proof. All precision and economy, nothing wasted. He had the voice of someone who had spent decades calibrating exactly how much volume was required to be heard without being loud. And the answer was, not very much. He watched everything. He said very little. When he did speak, it was because the situation had earned a specific response, and the response was always exactly sized to fit the situation. Not more, not less. He watched Maya on the first day with the same expression Briley had worn, which was the expression of someone who has read something and is comparing it to reality. On day 3, he corrected her support position without explanation and walked away. On day 5, he watched her run the 800-meter course in full kit with the rifle and the pack and the knee that was holding, but complaining, and he made a note in his small green notebook. She didn't know what the note said. She didn't ask. The other candidates were aware of her the way people are aware of something that doesn't fit the pattern they expected. Not all of it was hostile. Some of it was curiosity. Some of it was the professional attention of people who are very good at their job, watching someone else to assess whether that someone else is very good at theirs. A candidate named Richter, Sergeant First Class, late 30s, the kind of quiet that meant either depth or damage, and she hadn't figured out which yet, sat beside her at chow on the fourth night and said, "Your group at 400 is better than anyone else in this class." "My group at 600 is inconsistent," she said. "Everybody's is. That's what the course is for." She looked at him. "Why are you telling me that?" she said, which was the same question she'd asked Vega, which was apparently her default response to unexpected information from unexpected sources. Richter shrugged. "Because you looked like you needed to hear it." "I'm fine." "You ate in under 4 minutes and you've been staring at the table for the last 2. She hadn't realized she'd been doing either. "I'm processing," she said. Processing what? She thought about it, honestly, which was how she thought about things. "Whether I belong here," she said. Richter picked up his fork. "Everybody in this class is processing that," he said. "The ones who stop processing it are the ones who usually wash out." He ate for a moment. "The question isn't whether you belong. The question is whether you can do the work." She looked at him. "Can you?" she said. He almost smiled. "Ask me in 8 weeks. Week 4 was the sleep deprivation component that had taken Vega out the first time. 72 hours. Not continuous shooting, the course wasn't trying to kill anyone, but the hours were structured to prevent sleep in any useful quantity. Field problems at 0200, gear inspections at 0430, range sessions at varying intervals. A rotation of demands calibrated to keep everyone at the threshold where the body was functional, and the mind was beginning to lose confidence in its own outputs. On hour 44, Maya was behind a rifle at 800 meters, watching a target that kept moving in ways she wasn't sure were real. Her hands were fine. That was the thing she noticed. Her hands were steady in the way they'd been steady in the valley, which she was coming to understand was not a thing she could explain and had stopped trying to explain. Her mind was fraying at the edges. She'd had a full conversation with Ruiz that morning, before remembering Ruiz was in Kandahar. But her hands and her eye and the specific, narrow channel of information that connected the scope to the trigger were running on something that didn't require sleep. She put 3 rounds into a 9-inch group at 800 meters on hour 44, with a brain that was running on 90 minutes of sleep in 2 days. Dalton watched from behind her and said nothing. Vega, 2 positions to her right, was grinding through his own session. She could hear him breathing, controlled, deliberate, the kind of breathing you use when you're fighting the body rather than working with it. He'd made it past week 4 this time. She could feel the effort that was costing him. On hour 68, she found him in the equipment bay at 0300, sitting on a crate with his rifle across his knees and his eyes at half-mast, doing what she recognized as the thing you do when you're trying to stay inside a task to keep from going under. She sat on the crate across from him. "How's your group?" she said. He looked up, took a moment to process. "Ragged," he said. "At 600, I'm pulling left." "You're anticipating the recoil." "I know. Your trigger pull is clean when you're rested. I watched you on day 2. When you're tired, you rush the brake." He looked at her. "You were watching my trigger pull." "I watch everything." She paused. "Try counting to 3 between the decision to fire and the actual brake. It feels slow. It isn't." He was quiet for a moment. "Why are you helping me?" he said. She thought about that. Honest answer. "Because you told me on day 1 that you needed to know if I could shoot or if I was just a story," she said. "And I'd rather you find out I can shoot because we both made it through this than find out because you washed out." He looked at her for a long moment. "That's a strange kind of competitive," he said. "I'm a strange kind of person." Something that was actually close to a smile moved through his face. "Gone in a second." "Count to 3, he said. "Yes, count to 3. He stood up, went back to the range. She sat on the crate for another 2 minutes before following him. Week 6 was field operations. Real terrain, real distances, real decision-making, under the kind of pressure that the training environment could manufacture but not fully replicate. Because the training environment still had a safety structure underneath it, and real terrain did not. She was paired with Richter for the 2-person stalking exercise, which required them to move through 1,200 meters of mixed terrain to within 200 meters of an observation position, take a shot, and extract without being detected by the opposing element. It took 4 hours. The terrain was not kind. It was North Carolina woodland in October, which meant wet leaves that announced footsteps, low visibility, Temperature that sat at the precise level of cold that made hands stiff without making the problem obvious until it was already affecting performance. Richter moved well, better than she expected actually. He was big enough that stealth should have been a calculation, and instead it was just something he did, naturally, the way some large people are unexpectedly quiet. They lay in a shallow depression in the leaf cover for 40 minutes, waiting for the observation team's attention to rotate, and said nothing. Not because conversation was prohibited, but because neither of them had anything to say that the situation hadn't already said. At the window, she took the shot. The observer on the opposition element didn't know she'd taken it until the after-action told him so. Week 7 was the hardest. Not physically. She'd built the physical base and it was holding. The knee was holding. Her body had settled into the rhythm of the course, the way it had settled into the rhythm of the range in those early mornings on Range 7 with Kane. Physically, she was managing. Week 7 was hard because she started thinking. Not the productive thinking she'd been doing. Assessing, adjusting, problem solving. The other kind. The kind that showed up at 0200 when the building was quiet, and her mind, unable to sleep, began running its own version of the ammunition inventory. Counting things that weren't rounds. 8 people in the valley, 6 confirmed. She was going to do this again. That was what the course meant. Not as an accident of circumstance, not because the rifle happened to be there and the situation happened to require it, but as a deliberate choice, a professional identity, a thing she had signed her name to on a form with the SOCOM letterhead. She was choosing this. On the third night of week 7, she sat on the floor of the latrine at 0230, not because she was sick, but because it was the only private space in the building, and she needed to sit on the floor and be a person for a while. She thought about what Kane had said on the range one morning when she'd asked him how he'd carried the weight of it. Not the shooting itself, the carrying of it, the accumulation of it, the way it sat in you over years. He'd been quiet for a long time before answering. "I stopped trying to make it lighter," he'd said. "You can't make it lighter, but you can decide what you carry it for." She sat on the latrine floor and decided. She thought about the 4 people in that valley who were alive because the North Ridgeline had been suppressed. Walker, Okafor, 2 others whose names she knew from the roster. She thought about the helicopter with its fuel cells intact. She thought about the secondary explosion that would have taken out the entire perimeter if that RPG team had reached their position. She thought about what the wait was for. She got up off the floor, went back to her bunk, slept 4 hours, went back to work. Graduation was a Tuesday. Not a ceremony with pomp and considerable circumstance. This was not that kind of course. It was a final assessment, an after-action review, and a handshake from Dalton that lasted approximately 1.5 seconds. 9 of the 14 made it. Vega made it. She knew before the scores were posted because she'd watched him on the final field exercise. The way he'd moved, the way he'd taken the shot, the 3 count before the break that she could see in the stillness of his shoulders right before he fired. He was the second person across the finish line by a margin she'd have needed instruments to measure. Richter made it. She wasn't surprised. The 5 who didn't were not failures in any meaningful sense of the word, and she knew that, and the course knew that, and Dalton said as much in the after-action, which didn't make it easier for them, but was still true. She received her qualification documentation from Dalton in his office, which was even smaller than Walker's, and had no map on the wall, just a whiteboard with a wind formula written on it that someone had never erased. He held the document across the desk. "Graduated 4th in the class," he said. She took the document. "3rd in field operations," he added, which was not necessary information, and he knew it. She looked at him. "Thank you, Master Sergeant," she said. "Don't thank me." He leaned back. "What are your orders?" "Back to Raven Ridge pending reassignment." He nodded. He looked at her in the way she'd been looked at several times now by men who had spent their careers in this world. The way you look at something that took you by surprise and you're still deciding whether to admit it. "You came in through a strange door," he said. "I know. The course doesn't care about that, but the people around you will for a while. They already have. It doesn't stop when you graduate." "I know that too." He held her eyes. "You'll be fine," he said. And then, in what she was certain was an unprecedented departure from his operational communication style, "Kane was right about you." She didn't say anything for a moment. "How do you know Kane?" she said. Dalton almost smiled. It had the same quality as Walker's almost smile. Brief, controlled, the expression of a person who allows himself very little. "Same way Briley does," he said. "Same way about 40% of the people in this community do." He paused. He trained us. She walked out of his office into the October afternoon with the qualification document in her hand and stood on the steps for a moment, squinting in the light, feeling the specific weight of something finished. Her phone showed a text from Ruiz. It said, "Well," she typed back, "fourth in class. 3 seconds. Fourth? What happened to first?" She put the phone in her pocket. Fort Raven Ridge. 6 weeks later. She was standing in the supply depot when Walker found her, not counting ammunition this time. The depot was organized the way she'd left it, perfectly, obsessively, every lot number in its place. But she was standing in the middle of it, just looking at it, the way you look at a place you've been a long time when you know you're about to leave. Walker stood in the doorway. "Orders came through," he said. "Where?" "SOCOM support element, Bagram. They want you operational in 6 weeks. She looked at the shelving units, at the rows of inventory that she'd catalogued and recatalogued for the better part of 2 years. At the clipboard on the desk with the forms she'd filled out and the records she'd maintained, and the small, precise world she'd built out of numbers in a supply depot in Kandahar province. "Okay," she said. Walker came in a few steps. He looked around at the space with the assessing air of a man seeing it properly for the first time. "You were good at this," he said. "I was better at the other thing." "Yeah." He paused. "You were." She walked to the desk, picked up the clipboard, set it down. Old habit. "How's Shaw?" she said. "Physical therapy. He'll be back in the field by February." She nodded. "He asked about you," Walker said, "last week. Wanted to know how the course went." "What did you tell him?" "I told him fourth in class." He said only fourth, which is exactly what I expected him to say. She looked at him. Walker's face was doing the thing where it wasn't quite smiling. "Go see Kane before you leave," he said. "He's on the range." He was on range 7. Of course he was. He was sitting on the bench with his coffee and his brown t-shirt and his BDU trousers, not doing anything except existing in the space the way he always had. And when she walked up, he looked at her with the same expression he'd worn the first morning she'd shown up early. Assessing, specific, the look of someone checking a calculation. She handed him the rolled target from the last week of the course. He took it, unrolled it. It was her final field assessment shot. 800 meters, field conditions, 1 round. The hole was where it was supposed to be. He looked at it for a long time. Then he rolled it back up and handed it to her. "Keep it," he said. She tucked it under her arm. "Dalton says you trained him," she said, "long time ago." He said about 40% of the community. "I was busy for a lot of years." He picked up his coffee. "How was week 7? She looked at him. "You know about week 7? She said. "I know about week 7 for everyone who goes through that course." She thought about the latrine floor at 0230, the weight, what she'd decided to carry it for. "Hard," she said. "Yeah, but I got through it." "I know. Dalton called me." She blinked. "He called you?" "He calls me when someone I've referred makes it through. It's a courtesy." He set down the coffee. "He said you helped Vega with his trigger break during the sleep depth component." "I told him to count to 3. And he made it. He made it because he was good enough to make it. Kane looked at her, something in his face that she'd learned to read by now. Not the assessing look, not the calculation, something older and simpler. "That's the right answer," he said. She looked out at the range, at the empty target stands in the morning light, at the space where she'd spent 10 early mornings becoming something she hadn't known she was going to become. "I'm going to Bagram in 6 weeks," she said. "I know. And then wherever after that. That's how it works." She stood there for a moment, not quite ready to leave and not quite sure what she was waiting for. "Kane," she said. "Yeah." "Why me, specifically? There were 11 people in that first group session. Why did you ask me to come back the next morning?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because the others were trying to shoot," he said. "They were focused on the target, on the result, on what they wanted to happen." He picked up the coffee again. "You were watching everything else, the wind, the way the light moved, the other shooters' positions and what they were doing wrong?" He paused. "You weren't there for the shot. You were there for the system." She thought about that. "I count things," she said. "You read things," he said. "Counting is a subset. What you actually do is read systems. You always have been." He looked at her. "The military put you in a supply depot. That's not your fault. It's not even their fault, really. Systems sort people by what's available, not by what fits." He set down his cup. "I just moved you to a different part of the system." She looked at him. "Thank you," she said. He did the thing he always did, which was accept it without acknowledging it, nodding once with the minimal economy of a man who has been offered thanks enough times to understand that the right response is to receive it without either dismissing it or making it more than it is. "Go get your orders sorted," he said. She went. She left Fort Raven Ridge on a Thursday morning in November, 3 duffel bags and a rifle case in the back of the vehicle that was taking her to Kandahar Airfield for the first leg of the transit. Ruiz was there. He'd gotten up early, which for Ruiz was a significant gesture that she chose not to name out loud, because naming it would have made him uncomfortable. He looked at the rifle case. "You're really doing this," he said. "I really did this," she said. "I'm going somewhere else to keep doing it." He nodded. He put his hands in his pockets and looked at the vehicle. "You're going to be good at it," he said. "I know." Not arrogance, just the honest thing. He looked at her. "When did you get cocky?" "I'm not cocky, I'm accurate." He laughed. It was a real one, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, you are." She got in the vehicle. She looked back once as it moved through the gate. At the supply depot with its rust and diesel smell and its perfect rows of inventory. At the range she couldn't quite see from here. At the flat, enormous Afghan sky doing what it had always done, which was be larger than anything underneath it. She turned back around. She would spend the next 3 years in places she couldn't name in reports, doing work she couldn't describe to people who hadn't been there. She would be good at it. Not perfect. She would never be perfect. And the course of those 3 years would collect its own weight, its own nights on the floor, its own week 7s that had to be gotten through by deciding what the weight was for. She would make mistakes. She would have a shot at 900 meters go wide, in conditions that were no one's fault and her own regardless. She would work with people who doubted her and work with people who didn't, and learn to tell the difference early enough that it mattered. She would think about Bakersfield sometimes, the warehouse, the $11 an hour with no ceiling. She would think about the valley. She would carry both the way Kane had told her to carry things. Not lightly, because you couldn't make them light, but with a clear understanding of what she was carrying them for. 5 years after Fort Raven Ridge, she became an instructor. Not at a big facility, a small one, a course that ran 12 candidates at a time through an 8-week program. And she ran it with the same methodology she'd developed in the field. Precise, honest, unhurried, attentive to the things that people showed you before they knew they were showing them. On the first morning of her 3rd class, she walked out to the range to find a young woman standing at the firing line alone, before anyone else had arrived. 22, maybe. Small. Standing with a rifle that was technically too heavy for her frame, and doing nothing wrong with it. Maya stopped. Watched. The woman dry-fired 3 times. The trigger brake was clean, the follow-through was clean. But she wasn't looking at the target. She was watching the flags at the edges of the range, reading the wind pattern, her eyes moving with the quiet, systematic attention of someone who was not here for the shot. She was here for the system. Maya walked up beside her. "You're early," she said. The woman turned, startled slightly. She hadn't heard Maya approach, which meant she'd been fully inside what she was doing, which was the right kind of absorbed. "Sorry, Sergeant," she said. "I wanted to get a feel for the range before—" "Don't apologize." Maya looked at the flags. "What do you see?" The woman looked at the flags. "Wind's coming from 2 directions," she said carefully. "Northwest is the primary, but there's a secondary coming off that tree line on the east. They're going to interact at about 400 meters. She paused. "It's going to create a variable I'll need to calculate in real time instead of zeroing for it." Maya looked at her for a long moment. The woman looked back, not certain, not confident. The look of someone who had said the thing they actually thought and was waiting to find out if the thing they thought was right. "What's your MOS?" Maya said. 25U, Sergeant. Signal support." Maya looked at the flags again. At the tree line. At the 400-meter interaction point the woman had identified correctly, which was the kind of thing a trained eye took time to develop, and which this woman had walked in seeing on day 1. "Come back tomorrow," Maya said. "Early. Before the group." The woman blinked. "Why, Sergeant?" Maya picked up a rifle from the bench and held it out. "Because," she said, "you're wasting time running signal cable." The woman looked at the rifle. At Maya. Back at the rifle. She took it. And somewhere on the other end of a line that ran back through a supply depot in Kandahar, and a rock in a burning valley, and 10 early mornings on a range with a retired instructor who never talked about his students, the same door opened again. The one that had been there all along, waiting for the person who was finally ready to find it. The person the room overlooks is sometimes the only one who can see the whole room. The question was never whether you belong. The question is whether you'll show up long enough to find out.